Hello and welcome to our second Motor Week special from the Geneva Motor Show, where the good old Willys Jeep is still looking good. You know they don't make them like they used to, do they?
It's just, well, a bit drafty.
Such a fool.
The Geneva Motor Show is the most prestigious motoring event of the European calendar, and we're going to show you around it.
For pampered pooches with a taste for things Latin, this has got to be just about the best place in the world, because it is the, well, who'd have thought it, tailgate and the boot space on an Alfa Romeo estate. Well, actually not an estate, it's a Sportwagon, a small, nimble, compact but practical car. And there are some nice touches despite that sporting pedigree. For instance, the roof itself opens up with the tailgate and gives amazing access into what is quite a tight space. And it'll certainly have those sporting characteristics as well. An excellent range of petrol and, wait for it, common rail diesel engines with a range from 105 to 190 brake horsepower. Alfa Romeo know what they're doing when it comes to making sporting cars. This looks to be pretty practical as well. It goes on sale very soon. Should be an interesting proposition. And if I was a pooch, I'd want to be in the back of that.
You know, there are some people that are impossible to buy presents for, aren't there? You know, the ones who seem to have everything. A bit like Richard, really, I suppose. Anyway, here on the Motor Show, we've got a suggestion. How about a Royce Corniche? An extraordinary car with an extraordinary price tag.
Now, if you're in the market for one of these, then I'm sure the price won't be a consideration. The £250,000 that the standard Corniche cost will be just a drop in the ocean. Because if you've got the cash, then an open-top Rolls-Royce is the only way to travel.
Yes, it's the only way to travel because it is out-and-out luxury. They may cost a lot of money, but in here, in the interior, you can probably see where most of it goes. It's absolutely fabulous. Every Rolls-Royce is built to the customer's specifications at the factory, a process that takes around 3 months. Just look around in here, the wood veneer is gorgeous. It comes from the finest burr of walnut and is painstaking work. The upholstery is the finest quality Connolly leather from Scandinavian cows. Why only Scandinavian cows? Well, it's because they don't have any nasty barbed wire fences over there, so the hides don't get any scratch marks on them. And what about the carpet that you can sink your feet into? Well, it's got to be pure wool and it has to be nothing but the finest Wilton. And of course, if you're paying this much for a convertible, the last thing you want to do is to have to put the top down yourself. But the Corniche owner won't have to worry about things like that. All they'll need to do is use one little finger, because luckily a switch in the centre of the console takes care of the job for you.
Owners of the Corniche will be powered along by a crew-built 6.7-litre V8 turbo engine. It produces a colossal 320 brake horsepower and can haul this 3-ton monster to 60 in just 8 seconds. And it has a top speed of 135 miles an hour. As for the fuel consumption, well, just 15 miles to the gallon, I'm afraid. But I doubt that will put off any prospective customers.
The ubiquitous Golf. It wouldn't be a motor show without one. It wouldn't be a public road without one, in fact. They've been a mainstay for VW since we first saw them in what? The early 70s. Well, Ginny Buckley has been checking out one of the very latest Golfs.
Since it first appeared on our shores back in the late 70s, VW's Golf GTI has won a firm place in many a heart. It's a fantastic all-round motor. It looks the part, you know it's going to last, it's practical, but above all, it's always been fantastic fun to drive.
The Mark I Golf GTI was closely based on the standard Golf. An excellent, if slightly boring car. But an uprated suspension, a 1.6-litre fuel-injected engine and sports trim turned it into a pocket rocket.
During its lifetime, the Mark I changed very little, apart from the addition of a 1.8 engine that was carried over to the Mark II. Now, this model had got a little bit chunky around the midriff. But hey, don't we all as the years go by? But apart from that, all the important bits that made the Golf GTI so popular were retained. Behind the wheel, the Mark II does show its age a little bit. There's no power steering. Of course you don't get ABS as standard. And believe me, the ride is extremely harsh compared to modern cars. But despite all of that, it is fantastic fun to drive. But because of its age, it means that there are some positive points. The engine hasn't been strangled by that catalytic converter. The steering feels very direct, you get plenty of feedback and you know exactly what the tyres are up to. And the harsh ride does make you feel like you're going very fast indeed. This is the perfect car if you're young and you don't mind roughing it just a little bit. If that's you, then you will have an absolute ball. Unfortunately, all good things have to come to an end, so we waved goodbye to Mark II and we said hello to a rather different Mark III version. This time around it seems those Volkswagen engineers have gone all middle-aged. You may get an extra rotund body with the Mark III version and you get more refinement and room inside, but at what cost? Well, you feel it in the handling. There's a 2-litre engine in this version and it's got the same brake as the Mark II, but you really don't feel it. You've got to work it and keep the revs right up high to get the most out of the power. But having said that, in this version, you get a good all-round car and you are getting the GTI badge for not much extra cost. And then there were 4, or should that be 5? Because alongside the conventional Mark IV GTI, there's now, heaven forbid, a diesel version as well. Now I know that diesels and the GTI legend should really be kept apart, but give this car a bit of a chance. In terms of ride and handling, it feels no different to the Mark IV petrol GTI. But where the engine's concerned, it's a completely different ballgame. For a start, there's an awful lot more torque and it comes in much lower down the engine range. Now in many modern cars you really have to work the engine. You've got to get the revs up high, drop down the gears to get any power out of it. That's not the case with the TDI. You get an instant power surge just when you need it. And out of corners there's very little that can keep up with it. Believe me, it's fantastic fun. Okay, I've got to admit, there is a bit of rattle and roll when you first start up, and at low speeds it does sound a teeny bit like a bus. But let's get on to the subject of economy. This car will get you from A to B as fast as a petrol GTI version, but believe me, it will cost you an awful lot less.
The new Golf GT TDI PB has 115 brake horsepower, an increased load and torque, a 6-speed gearbox, and all the sports trim you'd expect on a GTI. And it's all very impressive.
VW's Golf GTI is a perfect example of evolution. But which version is the best? Well, that's an impossible question to answer because each of them offers something very different. If I was 19 again, well, I'd want the hard ride and the excitement of the Mark II version. But I'm not. And these days I like my creature comforts. And for that reason, I'm surprising even myself because I'd have to plump for that very torquey diesel.
This may look a bit wacky, but we are on the Citroën stand where things usually are a bit wacky. But here's what it's about. My old dad had a Citroën. I can remember being endlessly fascinated with the little lever that meant it could go up or down on its suspension. And this really is just a development of that. It's actually the 3rd generation of their hydractive system. Very complicated. And this is about simplifying it. They've harnessed the latest in electronics to actually make the whole thing faster and more responsive. It's got 2 modes still, but when it's in its comfort mode, it's a lot more comfortable. When it's in its performance mode, we're told it gives a much better performance. And it can also do things like lower the car to the ground when you increase the speed, which gives you more stability. Fascinating then to see Citroën taking something very complicated and, for a change, making it simpler so that people like me can understand it.
Join us after the break. We've got more from Geneva, and Richard will mark 20 years of the Audi Quattro. Hello and welcome back to the Geneva Motor Show 2000.
Well, it seems that a midlife crisis has hit the chaps at Vauxhall. They've had enough of producing dull, middle-aged cars, so they've decided instead to have a go at a sexy little sports car. Now, this could have been quite dangerous territory, but luckily they've had the good sense to team up with the folks at Lotus, who of course know a thing or two about sexy cars. And this is the result. It is, of course, the VX220. It's on sale in September, and it should be priced at around 25 grand.
The production version isn't that far from the concept that was unveiled at Geneva last year. It's got the same muscular wheel arches and features large intake air ducts, twin exhaust pipes and cool 3-dimensional headlamp and tail lights. The VX220 chassis is made from bonded aluminium, and there's an integrated steel rollover bar to give the driver extra protection.
The VX220 is powered by a Vauxhall 2.2-litre Ecotec engine, which means it'll get from 0 to 60 in just under 6 seconds and has a top speed of around 137 miles per hour. Now, this car may well have a Vauxhall badge on the front, but basically Lotus are building it, so the handling should be absolutely superb. After all, it shares the same chassis as the Lotus Elise. Now, it won't be quite the purest motoring experience that the Elise is, though. Vauxhall may want young, trendy motoring, but they can't bear to leave behind some of those middle-aged extras.
So that means you'll still get stuff like seatbelt pretensioners, anti-lock brakes and electric windows. But they have managed to resist the urge to give us air conditioning, central locking and power steering. The interior has the minimal feel of the Elise, with just the rev counter and the speedo on display. You also get sculpted sports seats, a nice steering wheel and an aluminium gear knob.
It'll be built in the Lotus factory in Norfolk from July, and it's going to be a very nice motor. There you go, boys. I never thought you'd be giving it loads about your new Vauxhall down the pub now, did you? Lotus have stolen Vauxhall's thunder just a little bit here at the Geneva Motor Show with the fantastic news that they're going to put this, the M250, into production in the year 2002. Now, Lotus are being tight-lipped at the moment about who's going to supply the engine, but what they will say is that it will be a 2.5-litre V6 producing 250 brake horsepower. And what performance it will give. 0 to 60 will take under 5 seconds. 0 to 100 just under 11 seconds. Supercar figures and, of course, supercar looks, but the good news is that it won't break the bank. It's going to give that experience to more people because it's going to cost around £40,000. And with 1,000 names already on the order books, this is going to be one very, very popular car.
A very large part of Lotus's business is engineering for other clients. Many of the technologies which appear in the Speedster have been showcased already in the Lotus Elise, which came out a number of years ago. So really what we're doing is it's all part of a strategy. We started off showing off the technologies that Lotus Engineering could do in our Lotus cars, and now other people want to buy them. As a consequence, we're now showing the Opel Speedster here today. We have technologies that people find attractive, and it helps us with our business. In terms of the shape of the car, we're intent that it should stay very close indeed. The shape of the car is very important for how it performs at high speeds, and so we don't want to change that at all.
Lotus, of course, remain tight-lipped about exactly which manufacturers smuggle their cars into Norfolk in the dead of night, but you can rest assured that Vauxhall certainly aren't the only ones. You see, Dr. Lotus are the chaps to call to cure a spot of soggy handling, and although hefty legal agreements stop them naming names, it's reckoned that around 10% of all engines in European cars have had a Lotus spanner somewhere in the works. So not to worry, if you can't afford the real thing like this gorgeous Elise, then you might almost be driving one anyway.
This is the legendary Audi Quattro system, and can you believe it's 20 years since we first saw it? Well, it better had, because it is. And earlier on this week, I used that as my admittedly rather feeble excuse to check out two opposite ends of the Audi Quattro story. Join me, if you will, on a trip back in time. A trip back before the Subaru Impreza, before the Mitsubishi Evolution series, before the BMW M3, before, in other words, the true sports saloon. To a time when the hottest point-to-point cars were the Lotus Sunbeam and the very early Golf GTIs. And then imagine meeting this for the very first time. It must have been good. The body shape didn't change, not even an inch, right from the very beginning to the end of production in 1991. This is a 1988 version, resplendent in this pearlescent white paint that was an optional extra, and it cost £1,000, even back then in the 1980s. With a little over 200 bhp available, there's no shortage of power, but it's how it puts it down that makes the Quattro really special. And this, the S4, is one of the very latest to wear the Quattro badge. Sure, things have moved on a bit. It's now got over 260 brake horsepower lurking under that bonnet, but then it is up against some pretty stiff competition nowadays compared to anything that was around in the 1980s. Wow, and straight away, what a difference a decade or two makes. Whereas the old Quattro just screams its performance potential at you. With today's S4, you've really got to actually start to explore it before you discover just how much this car really is capable of. Sure, it doesn't offer anything like the raw brutality of the Quattro of the 80s, but then it can't afford to. We're more demanding today. We expect a better compromise between sophistication and performance. This, the S4 Quattro, is the latest and I suspect the beginning of yet another line of Quattros. At £37,000, it is undeniably a true performance bargain.
This is the Mazda Demio. It's due to hit our shores sometime around June. As you can see, it's a small city car, which according to Mazda is fun, funky, user-friendly and versatile.
Inside, the cabin does feel quite spacious and it is fairly airy and bright. Plus you get a rather nice two-tone instrument panel, which is probably Mazda's idea of the funky bit. But when you have a good fiddle around, you feel that all the switchgear is solid and it does feel quite well made. The driving position is adjustable, it's very comfortable, and apparently there is enough room to carry 5 adults and 409 litres of luggage. It's all very impressive. It's just a little bit hard to get excited sitting in here when there are so many gorgeous models at this year's Geneva Motor Show.
Here's another reason why it ain't easy being a car manufacturer. Not so long ago, you only had to make probably 3 cars to have one in each sector. Maybe you'd have an estate, maybe a large family car, and maybe a small one for youngsters just getting going. Now though, it's different. If you're going to have one in every sector, you've got to have loads. This then is Daewoo's 7th car in their range. It's called the Takuma. That's an Afrikaans word that means joyful lifestyle. Yes, well, that's a hint as to what it's about. It's another mini MPV. Think of the Renault Scenic and other cars joining that brand new sector. And there's not a lot else to say about it at this point. Small, probably quite versatile with a bit of room in it, probably goes okay. It'll be on sale in Europe at the end of this year. And best of all, it'll probably also be cheap, which we do like. And so, yet another manufacturer completes the circle, clicks the last piece of the puzzle into place, finishes the range, finishes the set. In other words, can offer a vehicle in every sector. And this time it's the turn of Mazda with this, their Tribute. It's a sports utility vehicle. Another one, not a bad looking thing. It can have either a 2-litre or a 3-litre V6 engine. And oddly enough, Mazda say it'll do just as well on the road as it does off the road. Usual story. Well, we can judge for ourselves when it's launched towards the end of this year across Europe. But there is something far more interesting over here. Wow, this is more like it. Sports cars that bring out the child in you. This is the Mazda RX-Evolv sports concept. Now remember the old RX-7? It was the rotary engined one, a kind of unsung supercar, very fast, looked gorgeous and drank too much fuel. Well, this has got the same sort of engine in it, mounted somewhere at the front but kind of back towards the windscreen. It's also got really clever doors that open like that, but most importantly, it looks fantastic. Soak that up.
Well, it's been a fantastic show, so we can't resist one more look.
So that's it from the Geneva Motor Show 2000.
Of course, we'll be bringing you exclusive looks at all the rest of the international motor shows this year.
So stay with us.
Do you know, Richard, I can't believe you didn't like that film. Oh, it's horrible.